Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Standards Committee. My name is Pete Bradbury. I'm the committee chairman. Welcome you all to the meeting. A particularly warm welcome to our three independent members, David Horn, Wendy Swinton-Eagle and Paul Cummins. Of course, we have got a number of officers on the meeting as well. So I'm going to first of all then ask for the roll call to be done. I'm not sure who's doing the roll call. Sorry, Tom, Mr. Clark, do I do the roll call myself? You're on mute, Tom.
You do normally, Chairman.
Okay. So we've got, I've mentioned the independent members. We've got my Vice Chairman, Councillor Ash Edwards.
Present.
Councillor Alison Bennett.
Present.
Councillor Clark.
Present.
Councillor Ash Edwards, I've said already. Councillor Eaves.
Present.
Councillor Healy. Councillor Healy. You're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I'd been unmuted. Present.
Okay, thank you. I apologise because my screen is jumping around a bit. Councillor Bennett. I think that's Liz Bennett this time.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Present.
Councillor Denham St Pinnock.
Yeah, present.
Councillor Von Thunderclap.
Yep, yeah.
Have I missed anyone? As I say, apologies, my computer screen is jumping around. So, is there anyone here that I haven't asked yet?
For the record, Chair, David Horn, present, independent member.
Sorry, I'll do the independent members as well. I've already said you're all here. So, Wendy Swinton-Eagle.
Present.
And Paul Cummins.
Present.
Okay, have I missed anyone, or are we all done with that? Okay, in that case, I'll call on Mr. Clark, Head of Regulatory Services, to explain the meeting protocol.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a virtual public meeting in accordance with the regulations that were issued by the government back at the beginning of the pandemic. They are due to expire in May. Hopefully they will expire in May, but at the moment we're still all virtual meetings, and members are in control of their own microphone, but will speak in accordance with the chairman. At this meeting, we don't generally have votes, but if we do need a vote, we'll use the raise hand unless anyone wants a named vote.
Okay, many thanks indeed. Item 2 then is to receive apologies for absence, but I think we've got a full house, haven't we?
Yes, Chairman, I think everyone's here.
Okay, thank you. And item 3, there's no items of urgent business. So item 4 is declarations of interest. So can you use the raised hand function if you've got any interest to declare? Not seeing any. Item 5 then is to confirm the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 4th of August. They've been circulated and obviously you've had a chance to read them. So could I ask you by using the raise hand button to show if you're in agreement with these minutes, please, colleagues? Okay, have we captured those? And in that case, I'll ask you to take your hands down. And then could I ask if there's any one wants to vote against those minutes? Use the raise hand button. Councillor Alison Bennett, you've got your hand raised. You're happy with the minutes?
Yeah, I was just scratching my head, sorry.
No, you've got your hand raised on the screen. Okay, thank you. Right, I think we can take those minutes as agreed anyway. So that then moves us on to the main and indeed the only substantive item of business, which is the new model code of conduct. And I'll ask Mr. Clark to introduce this, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members will recall that the Committee on Standards in Public Life produced a report back in January 2019 in the expectation that their recommendations would result in legislation and the whole thing would be wrapped up that year. Unfortunately, things didn't quite work out like that, and we had a general election at the end of that year, and then there was all talk about it moving on very quickly thereafter. But of course, we then entered the pandemic at the end of March. Part of their recommendation was to charge the LGA with coming up with a new code of conduct, which would be based on the existing code of conduct, which went back to 2000, but hopefully was easier for members to use. Before you have the revised code of conduct starting on page 9. Personally, I think it reads quite well. You remember last time we had all this debate about civility, that has gone, but there are some very helpful notes, I think, in here that guide members in what the code is about and how to comply with the code. So for me, it is something that would be useful both for this council and also for our parish councils, which at the moment have a variety of codes of conduct, which they may understand, but the public attending sometimes don't. So I think it would be a good idea if in Mid-Sussex we all had a similar code of conduct which this offers. At the back, there are Appendix C, the best practice points of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, which is a reminder to us of what we need to do. One area I think we'll probably need to come back to in March is the question of how we deal with complaints. What filter system do we have? We did this about 5 years ago, but it could certainly do with a review in deciding what cases we take forward and what cases we refuse. As the code mentions, there is a tendency sometimes for people to have a personal dispute and then imagine it's something to do with the code of conduct. There was one parish council that had all sorts of arguments over the summer, but really they were all to do with sites being selected. They were nothing to do with the code of conduct, but they all managed to fall out. And I think the situation was worse because they were online rather than meeting in a room. So somehow we want members to properly debate matters and not think just because they haven't been successful in that debate that there must be a code of conduct issue to report. So I leave it to the committee to discuss the draft, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. And first of all, I agree with you. I think the way it's been laid out is very satisfactory. Colleagues, we're going to, in due course, we're going to go to, I'm looking at page 7 of my agenda papers and the recommendation there, and we're asked to recommend to the council, that's the Mid-Sussex District Council, that the LGA Model Code of Conduct is adopted, and then to encourage town and parish councils to also similarly adopt this code of conduct. As Mr. Clark has said, one of the things that's been an issue in the past is that where a parish council has had a different code of conduct to that of the district council, members of the public find it difficult to comprehend why that would be the case. And I think probably everyone would agree that to have a uniform code of conduct that's across all three tiers of authority, that would be county, district, and towns and council and towns and parishes, would be helpful. I'm also encouraged by and we live in a changing world, as we can see from the fact that we're not meeting in the flesh tonight, which is always disappointing. Always nice to see all those nice smiling faces in front of us. And we're due for, I suppose, to live more and more of our lives online as things go. So I do think one of the benefits of this, of the code going forward, is it does take more account of online behaviour. So I think just before we get into that, and I'm grateful to Councillor Eaves, who pointed out a number of minor drafting errors. Councillor Eaves, would you just like to go through those for our benefit, please? I think they are minor drafting matters, but nonetheless, let's get them right. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, these are just tiny predictive text problems. On page 7, last paragraph, it says modal code of conduct. It should say model. So E instead of A occurs twice in paragraph 6 on page 7. Page 9, third line, behaviours is spelt in the American way, so we could put a U in there. Through page 15, about line 5, to discharge its functions, it shouldn't have the apostrophe. The greengrocer's apostrophe there. And then
well spotted. Yeah, very good. Well spotted.
Lower down on 7.2, it says, I will, when using the resources of the local, and it looks as if there's a word missing there. So I don't know.
Yes, I think the word missing is authority. Okay. Quite a lot of councils give members computers, which then are subject to the code of conduct.
Okay. That may be all. Yep, that's all I think. Thanks.
Okay, well, no, thank you very much for those and for your diligence. And I'm happy to see, like me, you're a member of the apostrophe police. So
very much so.
Colleagues, the way I propose to deal with this is that I would first of all just like to have a general discussion on, without going over ground that we've covered before, but on the code of conduct itself, and then we'll go on to talk about the appendices. So we'll do it in those bite-sized pieces. Just before we do, though, and Mr. Clark, I don't know if I could just come back to you on this. I've just realised. So bear with me a second. No, okay, forget that. I've just caught up with myself. So, colleagues, first of all, the code itself, and I know we've discussed this in detail before, but has anyone got anything they would like to comment on this somewhat slightly amended form? Can you use the raised hand function if you want to speak, please? And I'll go first of all to Councillor Liz Bennett.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say what a great improvement this is. Over a number of years, when I've looked at the Code of Conduct, it can be a little bit confusing with lots of wording. This is very simple and very easy to understand. And I think the fact that our parishes may take this up as well, we've all got one thing to adhere to that's very clear, is fantastic. So I'm really pleased to see this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eaves next.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I've just found another one on page 8, para 13, modal code, should be model code.
Okay.
My first question is really, I don't know what's different, except that Mr. Clark's just told us that civility has gone, which I think is a shame. And it would have been nice if the things that were different were in bold or in red or something. And who has made the changes? Is it the county? Is it the towns? And thirdly, can we amend this? Because I'd quite like to submit an amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Clark, do you want to answer those now, please?
Yes, it was a group of people within the LGA, so lawyers, councillors, etc., that worked on this. They came up with this code, which, as you say, is similar to the old code, but seeks to make it more straightforward for members to understand and provide more guidance. So the comments of Councillor Liz Bennett are what they were trying to achieve. So it isn't a fundamental change, but it should help. I think it helps members in understanding where they have to declare interests and the nature of those interests, and the general tenor around bullying, equalities. It's an update. When I read it, I thought this reads better than anything I've seen before.
Okay, and on the matter of can we amend it, in theory, I suppose we can, but I do believe this is exactly the same text that's being proposed to be adopted by the county council. And there is not a requirement, but there's a clear benefit in all, as I said earlier, in all tiers of local government having the same code of conduct. Mr. Clark, am I right in what I'm saying?
Yes, you're right, Chairman. And I do know that Horsham, for instance, are seeking to adopt the same code. So it would mean across West Sussex, we'd have the same code, as opposed to codes with various slight amendments to them. You have to ask whether those amendments are actually worthwhile, rather than have a unanimity. Obviously, some people do live on the border of Horsham and Mid-Sussex and may attend both meetings.
Councillor Eaves, do you want to come back on that?
Well, as I say, what's bothering me is the social media. And last time we were talking about social media and the awful abuse that councillors had been subjected to, particularly Councillor Alison Bennett was just awful what she described she'd gone through. But I think it's important really for us to make sure that we as councillors treat the public right on social media. So that's my concern. And I don't really think that's covered. And I think manners are as important in social media as they are in real life. So what has particularly bothered me is that I've seen a crop of new social media sites in Burgess Hill purporting to be news sites, news pages, which I believe are political party pages, and they're undeclared. And I think that's misleading the public. So I would like to bring in a sentence on page 11, whereas it says, in undertaking my role, and there are 5 bullet points there, I'd quite like to put in a 6th one, which I think would cover this, and say, I will not seek knowingly to mislead the public, because I think those pages could potentially be a problem as we go into the purdah before elections. Because if somebody's boosting a post and paying money to boost a post and not declaring that they are actually a political party page, then that would be misleading. And in fact, it's misleading all the time. So that's my concern. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor, I think we've indicated that we're reluctant to make any changes to the code of conduct for the reasons that that we've just outlined. But Mr. Clark, the point that Councillor Eaves is making, is that covered within the existing principles of councillor conduct anyway?
I think it is, Chairman, because the Nolan principles set out that basically you must act honourably and with integrity. So if you go on social media and intentionally mislead the public, that would be a breach of those, and therefore, in all likelihood, the code itself.
Okay. Are you content with that, Councillor Eaves?
Well, that's good to know. Yes, if you think it's covered. I mean, it does say I act with integrity and honesty, but I just thought it would be good to actually spell that out, that we should not intentionally mislead or knowingly mislead the public. I don't know what other members or independents think.
Well, I do think that is covered by the 7 Nolan principles. And I don't know if you're familiar with these. There is a if you look at page 18.
Can I come in, Chairman?
Who's that? Sorry,
Douglas.
In a moment, if I may, because there are other speakers who've indicated as well. So I will come to you in a minute. I just want to finalise this point. But if you look at page 18, where the Nolan principles are listed, then it does seem to me that there's a number of places there where that would be covered by the Nolan principles. So
the point I want to make is I disagree with you.
Okay, well, I'll come to you and you can disagree in due course. I think let's leave that point there for now. I've got David Horn wanting to speak next.
Thank you, Chair. And while I welcome the intent and the principles underneath this model code, there are some issues which I would want to draw to the committee's attention. The first is that when we looked at the draft in August of this document, it had an important section about how breaches of the code would be dealt with. And it included, for example, a suggested internal resolution procedure. This is part of the code, not part of the appendices. And that seems to have dropped off. I don't know the logic behind that, but if the intention is this to be a useful document, not just for councillors, but for members of the public, I think having an awareness of how breaches of the code will be processed is an important part of the code itself. So that is one point. The question of amendment that was raised by Councillor Eaves and has already been answered, I think is an important one, because in referring this to the parish and town councils within Mid-Sussex, I think that should be spelt out. But I believe, and I will be corrected by Tom Clark if I'm wrong, that it's intended by the LGA that this code is subject to a review process, that is an annual review process. Now, I don't know where I've picked that up from, but if there is a review process on the code, then I think in making a recommendation to the district council and indeed to the town and parish councils, then I think it would be useful to make clear that there is a process for annual review and how that would be addressed. I think I know we're going to come and talk about the appendices in a bit more detail, because I do have a comment on one about the disclosure of pecuniary interest, but there are 2 other points I'd want to make, if I may.
Yeah, I'm going to come to the appendices when we finish the...
Yeah. Okay. But these are points which are not related to appendices.
Sorry, right, okay.
And the first of these 2 points is whether there is any accompanying guidance from the LGA to go with this code. I think when we looked at the draft in August, I recall that there was an intention from the LGA to have sort of all sorts of sort of supporting literature. If it is the intention of the LGA to sort of come forward with that, it would be nice to know what they're coming forward and by when. The last point, Chair, is that I think Tom mentioned in his introduction that he would be looking to review council procedures and policies in the light of this model code if it is adopted by the full council. And just to say, I'd be happy to be involved in that sort of process, and happy to be involved as appropriate in moving that forward.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. I do believe that your assertion that this is subject to annual review is correct. And I'm not sure when in the cycle will be the appropriate point for us to, offer our comments on what, perhaps improvements we might like to suggest. Mr. Clark, would you like to cover the other points, please?
Yeah, just on that first point, Chairman, it's from the best practice principles, which we'll get to. The Committee on Standards in Public Life felt it should be reviewed annually. On the question of the LGA, yes, they were intending to produce some guidance, but so far I haven't seen that. This was published in December, so it's not too far on. Hopefully we will see something next month, probably, to provide further guidance on this draft code.
Right. Okay. I've got Councillor Denham St Pinnock next. Are you not able to use the raise your hand function on your?
I haven't got one on the bottom.
Right. Okay. Anyway, if you'd like to go now. Thank you for waiting.
I want to the points raised by Councillor Eaves. Social media. I don't believe this document addresses social media at all. It is a specific issue that should be being addressed. I don't think the reference to the Nolan principles is relevant at all. They're very broadly drafted, and they're rather historic. They don't refer to a time of social media. They were drafted in the 1990s. So I'm very familiar with them. I've worked in a number of senior roles in the public sector and the publicly funded sector. And they're not necessarily, I know we use them still, but they're not up to speed. Now, Councillor Eaves suggested a possibility of making a minor amendment. I've got no connection with anything that may have been going on in this council. This is driven largely by my impression of councils nationally and not under the control of one party or another, but just across the board. So I did draft a paragraph 6.2, which refers specifically to social media. And as a chairman of a parish council in this district, it's something I would like to insert in ours, even though we certainly haven't had any issues at this time. But it talks about the abuse and the misuse of social media and misrepresentation. And I think it should be specific. And I think we should add something. And I don't think it's good enough just to gloss over it and say that the generality of the document covers the point. I don't think it does. I have a draft if you want to hear it.
Okay, before we do, if I could just refer you to the top of page, the bullet points at the top of page 12, which specifically refers to the code applying to electronic and social media communications, posts, statements and comments.
Yes, I know, but I don't think it's, as I just said, it's not specific enough. In the core of the document, it should have a paragraph about social media and the way it's being used.
Okay. If I may, colleagues, I think as we've said, there's an urge to have a common code of conduct across all councils. Separate to that is the ability for us to make suggestions to the LGA as to what improvements we would like to see in the next iteration. So, Mr. Clark, can I seek your advice here as to what's the best way to proceed with this?
Well, we are able to make amendments, Chairman. As you say, the social media is mentioned here. If members aren't satisfied with what's before them, which has had a lot of work put into it, then we could take these suggested amendments away and bring it back to your next meeting, if that's where they're minded. The only drawback I see is that would then take us out of line with our neighbouring councils, in all probability. So
what I would like to suggest is and I'm not disagreeing with the comments either that Councillor Reeves or Councillor Denham St Pinnock have made, but it does seem to me the right way for us to proceed with that is to make those as suggestions to the LGA as to how the next iteration of the Code of Conduct might be improved. I mean, it is a living document and it will be obviously, you know, amended and improved from time to time. So that would be my suggestion as to how best to deal with this. And Mr. Clark, would we do that at this meeting, or would we take these suggestions at a subsequent meeting? I'm not quite sure what the process is for making comment and suggestion to the LGA as to what improvements we might like to see going forward.
Well, they're happy to receive comments at any time. And as you say, Chairman, that it is envisaged that this will be reviewed annually anyway. So we'd expect some changes based on the experience of using the Code of Conduct. When you get a new code, some peculiar things happen sometimes and it doesn't quite work as they expected it to work. And you'd expect them to try and plug any holes that there might be. But I just think this is a good starting point, and we learn from experience of using it.
Okay. Councillor Denham St Pinnock, would you be happy to proceed like that?
Yes, I would. I'm perfectly happy to let Tom have my my paragraph and to have him share that with members if they want to see it in advance of the next meeting. The same, presumably, or show it to Councillor Eaves, who I don't know, and proceed. But I do think this needs beefing up along those lines, and ignoring social media in the age of post-Trump age is a mistake.
So do you have your suggested paragraph to hand?
I do.
Would you care to read it out for us?
It's 6.2. I undertake not to abuse or misuse any social media, either private social media or the local authority's social media. I undertake to be honest and truthful when using all social media, not to misrepresent known facts and figures, and not to abuse or bully addressees.
Okay. So I think your suggestion is a good. I quite like the sound of that. So my suggestion is if you could send that to Mr. Clark.
Yeah.
And Councillor Eaves, if I could ask you to get your form of words together and send that to Mr. Clark as well. And when we have the next standards meeting, we can discuss those in more detail and hopefully reach a resolution to send them, or whatever amended form of those we come to decide onto the LGA. Are colleagues content with that as a way forward?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman.
No, thank you. So we'll do that. I've got a few other hands up. So I've got Councillor Liz Bennett next. You've already spoken once, Councillor Bennett. Is this an additional point?
I have. It's just a point really that I'd like to make in regard to some of the comments that I've just listened to. And I've just sort of asked for a bit of caution really on this, because it's important that this document is fairly loose so that it's looked at with people's own interpretation as to what's gone on. If we list every possible misdemeanor that might happen in this document, it won't work because it would be impossible. It had to be overarching principles which would aid councillors in how in the way that they act. It would act as a guide also for people that might wish to make a complaint. So it's important it's done like this so that people can then look at each situation separately. It would be impossible to list it all. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And I suspect you might therefore want to, you know, when we debate these possible additional points at the next meeting, obviously you can make that point then. But thank you for that. I've got Councillor Liz Bennett next.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I couldn't unmute then successfully. A couple of points I wanted to make. One was that very much support the suggested form of words that Councillor Denham-St Pinnock just read out to us, and I'd look forward to debating that at a future meeting. As he says, I don't think you can ignore this, and I think I don't think you can ignore how we conduct ourselves on social media, and we need to hold ourselves to the highest standards there as we would if we were meeting face to face. And my other query really was around the Mr. Clark said that we can amend this report, but clearly that puts us out of sync with the County Council and potentially other neighbouring districts and boroughs. So my question was really, is there conversation within West Sussex between the different authorities that ideally want to accept a common set of standards guidelines, which, you know, I can see the merit of that? Or does the conversation or the suggested change have to go up to the LGA, and then next time the LGA review them, it gets filtered down nationally, and then in our silos, we debate what's put in front of us, and then it goes up to the LGA and back down again? That seems like a very, very slow way to improve this document. Whereas within West Sussex, within the authorities in West Sussex, there's potential to have something more robust that's fit for 2021 and everything that happens online there more quickly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think the answer is that yes, the LGA is the owner of this document in the form that it's been presented to us, and I think there is just from listening to colleagues, I think there is a general acceptance that to have, you know, a common code of conduct is beneficial.
Chairman,
So,
I could share it with my fellow monitoring officers in West Sussex. So we could have a West Sussex version, which would be the same across West Sussex. That is possible. We are in touch with each other, and they may find the proposed change beneficial to all of them. I'll see.
Okay. Well, perhaps that's we can also have that debate further when we next visit this topic, which I believe it looks like it's going to be at the next standards meeting, isn't it? So thank you for that. Councillor Healy next, please.
Hi, good evening, Chair. Sorry, I was actually, I'm as concerned as anyone about social media, but I actually, reading this, I did think, at the risk of sounding as if I'm disagreeing, that it is quite clear that the application of the code does apply to electronic and social media, all posts, all statements, all comments, and that I thought it was actually quite good because you've got 7 principles, and something, I haven't seen the post to which Councillor Reid's referring, but obviously if something's misleading, looking at this, you could probably throw 5, if not 6 of those principles at them as a breach, as it stands. And sometimes when it is more loosely written, it probably gives more options to bring some kind of action against somebody if it's obvious that they're putting something that's misleading, untruthful, whichever it may be. But I am as concerned as anybody. I'm not disagreeing, but I do think even as it stands, there's a lot there that would enable action to be brought. And of course, as this becomes adopted, if a specific social media case comes before us, that's probably the time when these things would be could be considered for rewording more carefully when something happens that it does not fit into those principles and that code. But I'm happy. I'm not disagreeing. I'm happy either way. I just wanted to sort of say, I believe that you could interpret this as strongly or as loosely as we may wish.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And I've got Councillor Eaves wants to come back again.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to thank Councillor Denham St Pinnock for his amendment, which I think is even better than mine, and I'd like to see us discuss that now. I don't really see why we have to wait until for another year, possibly. If we wait for the next standards meeting, will that be beyond the election? Because my concerns relate to something that's going to happen before the election in the PERDA period. And if we can't amend this, then what's the point of us meeting in a way? You know, if we're just a rubber stamp exercise, or if we can't amend it until too late, I think that's rather peculiar. But I do recognise the idea of having the same code of conduct across the entire county, because there are some people who have two hats. I do recognise that. So can we debate the Denham St Pinnock amendment now? Thank you.
Well, thank you, but I think we've agreed we're going to address that at the next meeting. When the and if you're content to support his proposal, then we can deal with that at the time. So, colleagues, I'm going to move you on now, if I may. I've got no more hands raised on that. I accept it's difficult because you know, in accepting that we have a common code, then we have to accept that any amendments or changes we want to make need to be fed up the into the LGA. And then see what comes back. And of course, the other councils elsewhere across the country and the county and the country will be making, will be having similar thoughts and making similar suggestions, no doubt. So, we can't have it both ways. Either we have a common code, or we do our own thing. And I think the consensus has been that we want to have a common code. So, we're not going to change. We're not going to change that short term, I think, is what we've agreed. So, moving on. So, Appendix A is just the repeating the 7 Nolan principles that I'm sure everyone is very familiar with, and I don't think we need to have a discussion on that. Appendix B, registration of interests and so on. Again, Mr. Clark, is there anything you particularly want to pull out of this? I mean, I did think this part was relatively straightforward, and the guidance I've always given to people is as soon as you think you might have a conflict of interest, then you do. So, but Mr. Clark, is there anything that you want to point out in this?
No, only, Chairman, that I personally think this explains the situation. Say for new members, it explains what registering interest is about and what is relevant to register, which we didn't have previously. We just had a sort of list of things and not really any explanation to go with it. Just on Councillor Eaves' point, the next meeting is early March, so it's a long way before the election.
Thank you. David Hornick, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is about, indeed, Appendix B and paragraph 4, which talks about non-participation in cases of disclosable pecuniary interests. The final sentence of that paragraph refers to dispensations, but in very limited circumstances, and I'm conscious that elected councillors do carry a democratic mandate, and there may be occasions where, despite having a disclosable pecuniary interest, it's quite legitimate for them to be able to voice an opinion at a committee or indeed at a full council meeting. I therefore have a bit of concern about the limited circumstances which would exist for a dispensation, but there's also a question about the process behind that dispensation, and certainly in other authorities, independent members have a role to play in advising advising the monitoring officer as to whether dispensations should or should not be applied. I draw that to your attention because to me it raises some concerns, as you say, that limited circumstances and the process where approvals may be given for dispensation and the potential role of independent members in that process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. I understand the point entirely. In fact, I've been in such a situation myself at the time that I was a member of Anstine Staplefield Parish Council. At that time, I had a dispensation over a matter which, although it did affect me in that the item in question was very close to my house, if we hadn't issued dispensations, then the parish council wouldn't have been quorate. So that was one of the examples where and of course in that case the dispensation was given on advice from the district council to the parish council. I'm not quite clear so if the district council needed a dispensation, is that what you're asking? Where would the responsibility for that lie?
It's yes, what the process is for granting a dispensation, because certainly, for example, at Brighton and Hove City Council, where dispensations are granted by the monitoring officer on the advice of the independent person or independent members.
Thank you. Mr. Clark.
That situation hasn't arisen here. There's been no district member who sought a dispensation. The dispensations we've have normally been given by the clerk at a parish council, and they have related to work on neighbourhood plans. And the sort of situation has arisen that members do get dispensations unless they're the actual owner of the land being promoted. And that seems to have worked reasonably well across the parish councils in Mid-Sussex up to now.
Okay. I see no more hands up, so I'm going to move on to Appendix C, if I may now, which is the some best practice guidance. And rather than go through all these one by one, again, I'll just ask for you to raise your hand if you want to comment on any of these. I mean, I actually think these are laid out very clearly and succinctly. But has anyone got any comments they want to make? I'm not seeing any hands.
Just one from me, Chairman. It's your point about the Code of Conduct being a living document. Best practice 3 means that it is reviewed.
Okay, thank you. If there's no comments, then I'm going to take you back, if I may, colleagues, to page 7, where the recommendation is, and I'm going to, with the assumption, and well, not the assumption, but it will be in the minutes that we're going to have a further discussion about what improvements we would like to see. Possibly to recommend to the LGA, and we're going to take those at the next meeting of the committee. Are those recommendations agreed, please? Councillor, do I need to do a raise hands to take a vote on this? Mr. Clark?
Yes, Chairman, I think that's probably the best way of dealing with it.
Okay, so if you're content with the recommendation, could I ask you, please?
Could I just ask a quick point of clarification?
Yes, of course you can.
Thank you. Can I check that Councillor Eve's amendments, or not amendments, corrections, are going? Yeah, the grammatical corrections are going in that we discussed.
You're on mute, Mr. Clark.
Oh, sorry, they will be made, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you. Thanks.
I have to say it came direct from the LGA, so it's their fault, not mine.
Okay, so if you could now raise your hand if you're happy to accept the recommendation on page 7. Okay, thank you. Take your hands down now, please. And if anyone... Councillor Ash Edwards still got your hand up. Thank you. No, you still got your hand up, I'm afraid. There we are. And is anyone against that recommendation? Please put your hand up now if you are. No. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Just before, item 7 is that there's no questions in Council Rule 10.2. Just before we finish, and it's very remiss of me, so I apologise in advance, but I should of course have welcomed Councillor Smith to the committee at the start of the meeting, so apologies for forgetting that. She has replaced Councillor Brunston, who resigned at the end of last year, and I'm sure will be a very valuable member of the committee going forward, and you're very welcome, Councillor Smith. That's it, colleagues. Remains only for me to wish you a very good evening. Councillor Alison Bennett, if you could stay on it after the... oh, no, we can't because it's a public meeting stream, isn't it? I just need to speak to you about a separate matter. So perhaps I'll give you a call instead, if that's okay. Is that all right to do that now?
Yes, that's fine.
Fine. Okay, lovely. In that case, colleagues, I wish you all a pleasant evening. Thank you very much for your attendance and for all your very helpful suggestions, comments and thoughts. And as Mr. Clark has indicated, the next meeting is early March. Is it the 3rd of March? Do I remember correctly? You're on mute, Mr. Clark.
I think it's the 8th, and if members could stay in their places till the live streaming ends.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good evening.